We've received a lot of criticism for objecting to raising the limits that are currently way, way too low, that's $75 million. First of all, they wanted to raise the limits of liability for economic damages to $10 billion, and I objected to that because both the President and the Secretary of Interior, Ken Salazar, had said we need to really think thoughtfully all the way through as to how high of liability limits we want. Then they came forth with no liability limits. And let me say this, these are my words and not the words of any of the experts. But I spent many years of my life in the insurance business. I can remember in 1994, I was the one that introduced the bill to put a repos so that on aviation products. At that time, we were importing aviation products and airplanes from other countries because we weren't making them here. Why, Mr. President, weren't we making them here? Because our tort laws wouldn't let us do it. Because we had unlimited liability. They didn't have any limits out there. And consequently, Piper Aircraft had to go into bankruptcy, and they had to move, actually, some of their operation to Canada because their tort laws were different at that time. Well, we introduced and passed a bill that was intended to be a 12-year repose bill. That meant that if you manufacture an airplane or an airplane part and it works fine for 12 years, you can't, and then there's an accident, you can't go back against the manufacturer. Well, we couldn't get it through. Instead, we had an 18-year repose bill. And the 18-year repose bill was one that I thought was too long. I mean, you know, if something's been running for 18 years, then you couldn't go back and sue. Well, I called Lloyd's of London, and they said, you know, you're right. I don't care. We don't care if it's 18 years or 12 years or 20 years. You have to have an end to underwrite against. In other words, we can't insure it unless we know that there is an end in the future. Consequently, that's what we need to do in this, because companies have to be able to have insurance in order to drill. We didn't think that was so necessary prior to the tragedy that we're addressing right now in the Gulf. And now we realize that should be what we need to do. Now, if we leave it open-ended, that's going to mean that if we ever have any drilling or any exploring in the Gulf, it's going to have to, in my opinion, be done not even by the Big Five, which would include BP. It would have to be done by the national oil companies, such as those in Venezuela, those in China. And so I think, in my opinion, if we adopt something with an open-ended, unlimited liability, then that means that we are all through drilling in the Gulf. Quite frankly, Mr. President, that's exactly what the Obama administration wants. All this hype that they talk about on oil and gas, just earlier this week, we had the Sanders Amendment, which would have put anyone out of business who is in the business of drilling, including our marginal producers in Oklahoma. A marginal well is only 15 barrels a day, and that's what we do in Oklahoma. And yet, the average marginal well produces only 2 barrels a day, but accounts for 28% of the domestically produced oil. Well, that's significant. They would have been out of business if we had adopted the Sanders Amendment, which we handily defeated earlier this week. But I really believe that the statement that was made yesterday by Senator Rockefeller pretty much says it right, and I hope I have this here so I can refer to it. He was criticizing all these efforts to try to have some kind of cap and trade. And the meeting that took place yesterday, I think, pretty much verifies the cap and trade is, in fact, dead. The votes simply aren't there. I don't have this. Yes, I do. This is what took place yesterday. It was in this morning's Politico, that the Senate Democrats may have emerged from a much-hyped caucus meeting without a clear plan for the summer's energy bill, but they appear to agree on one point, and that is cap and trade is dead. And I've been saying that now for about 3 months, and I think we're hearing that now from a lot of the Democrats. Senator McCaskill said, and was quoted this morning, "I don't see 60 votes for a price on carbon right now." And the same, there are quotes by several, but the quote I really liked And this is, I want you to listen to this, Mr. President. This is really profound, and I don't think I've ever quoted Senator Rockefeller and said that this is something in which I totally agree. He said the Senate should be focusing on the immediate issues before us: to suspend EPA action on greenhouse gas emissions, push clean coal technologies, and tackle the Gulf oil spill. I'm still quoting now Senator Rockefeller. He said, we need to set aside controversial and more far-reaching climate proposals and work right now on energy legislation that protects our economy, protects West Virginia, and improves our environment. I agree. That's what we need to do. And we on the Republican side have said we have an energy policy, and that policy is all of the above. I would yield at any time to my friend from Connecticut, since he had time reserved. Apparently he doesn't want it. So it may be that the caucus that met yesterday was united in the idea that the cap and trade is dead, but I don't think that's necessarily true with the Obama administration. I'd be glad to yield to my friend.
No, not at all. It was my good friend and colleague.
It's my understanding that they only have 4 more minutes till the UC statement's going to be made here, so we're almost out of time anyway.
No, we've got time. I'm looking at floor staff, let me know we've got a little more time available.
Let me ask the chair how much time is remaining before, I think the senator from Nebraska has reserved time. Isn't that correct?
Not officially.
Evidently not.
Conclude and say that I'll come back and talk about this at a later time. I do believe that President Obama's poster has some ideas that became public, and I just want to share this last thing, and that is Joe Benenson, who is the president's campaign poster, did a survey for a somewhat of an extremist environmental group, and among other things, Mr. Benenson found, based on his interpretation of the survey results, pushing for cap and trade and tying opposition to it, to big oil, is a potent political weapon for Democrats against Republicans this fall. I think that says it all. People are using this tragedy in the Gulf for political purposes, and this is something that we want everyone to understand and want to end. With that, I yield the floor.